welcome back to another episode of Fireside Chat with me, your host, Akshara. On today's episode, we have someone who has traveled to several countries and was an international student himself. He also has over 10 years of experience in the field of international education and has served different roles. Ryan Fleming, Director of Partnerships for AECC USA. So join me as I pick his brain about his study abroad experience. Hi Ryan, how are you
Hi,
doing?
Akshara. How are you? I'm good.
I'm good too. So
Thanks
how's
so
the
much for
weather?
having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, how's the weather there?
Well, we just actually had our first day of summer yesterday here in Buffalo, New York. So it is gorgeous. The sun is shining until after 9 p.m. where I live. So it's kind of an interesting feature of the more northern latitudes. And we're having a great time, honestly. It's a beautiful time of year.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really want to take a moment to appreciate you, making the time to do this with us.
Of
And
course. Of course. Yeah,
we
thank
have
you so
a lot
much.
of questions that we have from students, and
Sure.
we'll have some questions that's going to pick your brain about your journey as an international student. We believe you spent some time in Spain.
I did, yes. So, as an undergrad student, I spent 4 months in Spain, in Barcelona, in a program that was all about learning Spanish. That was actually my undergraduate degree, was in Romance languages and literatures, with
Ooh,
focusing on Spanish as one of the Romance languages, of course.
wow,
Um,
very interesting.
yeah, so I kind of got to a point in my undergrad career where I knew that I wanted to study abroad, and certainly learning languages is one of the most obvious ways that can get you in a different country trying to learn a new language and a new culture.
Mm.
And Spain for me, I think just represented, I think Spain for me represented the pinnacle opportunity of where you could really do that effectively. I mean, I was looking at Cuba at one point. I was looking at Chile at one point down in South America, and Spanish is spoken very differently in each of these places, Spain, Cuba, and Chile. Cuba
Yeah.
for me was just going to be a difficult choice. Chile also was very isolated for me, being down in South America. Um, I was also really interested in study or traveling to different countries while I was studying abroad. The ability to travel and see some different places was really important to me. And so, for that aspect, coming from the US, for me to go to Europe and learn Spanish in Spain, I think made a lot of sense.
Hmm.
And Barcelona, the main choice once you're decided on Spain is, do I want to go to a big city or do I want to go to a smaller town? I really preferred a big city environment personally because I came from a very small town. So for me, this was amazing, super special culture, the history, the architecture, just incredible.
Just
Um, yeah, so I had to choose between basically Madrid and Barcelona, and Barcelona with the seaside vibe and kind of the more colorful artistic scene, in my opinion, was just the draw for me. So I went to Barcelona and I had an amazing time. And I think that's really what put me on this path of international education, was coming back and saying, wow, that was life changing. And how can I be involved in helping to bring that experience to other students who might be interested in studying abroad from their perspective? And, what kind of work can I get involved in that
Yeah,
will support access for other students? And that's kind of what my career has been about ever since.
that's amazing. I mean, I think that's one of the key aspects that makes AECC truly unique because we have a lot of employees here on board with us at AECC who were once international students themselves. So they understand every part of a student's journey as they move from their home country to a completely new country where they don't know anyone. So
You're
that
absolutely right. Even from our founder, who was an international student himself, I think that really sets the tone and creates the culture. And we're
yes,
bringing in people who are not just selling something or working in a company, but they have lived that experience. They really believe in it. And everything that we do is about ensuring that students have the best possible range of opportunities for their own study abroad story. And so, 1 year in now, next week, it's just been really exciting to be a part of that and to help kind of contribute my own background and insights towards that shared goal.
yeah. What do you envision in your, current role with AECC? Say another year from now, where you see this going?
Well, it's a process. I don't know at what point, 1 year from now versus 3 years versus 10 years. I know for sure that the vector of growth for AECC, as far as I'm concerned, is to help to grow the US as a study destination, which means practically working with institutions here who are interested in recruiting international students, vetting them to make sure that they are the right educational opportunities, that the quality on campus is very high. So I personally go and visit campuses. I'm looking at their dining facilities, at their housing facilities. We talk to them about the courses that they provide. We ask them very detailed questions about what internship opportunities are available, what post-study work connections and introductions can the advisors make for students, because we really want to make sure that if we're counseling a student through the AECC offices that students would visit, they're being connected to the top tier experiences in the US. And so that's really where I come in. Unfortunately, I don't talk to students every day in my current role, but you could kind of think of me as being behind the scenes, ensuring that the choices that students have are as excellent and as broad as possible so that everyone can find the right opportunity for them. Now, I don't know, in 1 year, how far have we gotten in that mission? I can tell you we've already made excellent progress in the past year. We've brought on some amazing partnerships that just have tremendous opportunities for students, great quality of life. And I think students will be really excited to learn more about those. I think we're just going to keep doing what we're doing in the next year. And at some point, maybe look at over a 5-year period where we've taken the business here and just evaluate from that stage what students need from us at that point.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a very prime example of our core motto, which is at AACC especially, which is putting student first.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So,
absolutely.
circling back to your experience as an international student, what
Sure.
motivated you to choose Spain as your study abroad destination?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, studying Spanish at the undergraduate level, there became kind of a gap between students who, like, either you were going to study abroad or you weren't. And I think that is unique to language learning as a degree program, where in other disciplines, you could go study abroad and that's wonderful, but it wasn't as integral as it would be if you are learning a language and you really want to master it and not just have a reading understanding or maybe a low level understanding. If you want to try and gain fluency, you have to go and you have to immerse yourself in a different culture where as soon as you wake up in the morning, it's Spanish for lunch and Spanish for dinner and Spanish until you go to bed and you're dreaming in Spanish. And I did. It was pretty amazing. Like, you start dreaming in different languages, that's how you know that it's really sinking in. So for me, it was like not a choice of to study abroad or not. That had to happen if I was serious about my academic choice as an undergrad. I think from there, as I mentioned, it comes down to, like, do you want to be in a bigger city, urban environment, or do you want to be in a really small town? Are you planning on going to other countries or traveling while you're already studying abroad, or are you content to kind of stay in the country where you're going? And depending on your answer, you might make choices that position you to take advantage of that. So while I was in Spain, I was able to visit France, Germany, Italy, Andorra, Ireland, all these different places just by virtue of getting on a plane for maybe 2 hours. And that's not something I felt that I could do if I went to Chile, for example. Although Santiago de Chile, if you look it up, it's just incredible. They've got mountains and just amazing scenery. And I think if you wanted to stay there and just learn more of a South American blend of Spanish, that would work pretty well. Just for me, I made a different choice based on my own preferences. And that just kind of, it was like the road led me to Barcelona. And certainly in hindsight, it was the right choice.
That's nice. So, how did the study abroad experience shape your personal and professional growth? I'm pretty sure it did have a very profound, influence.
It did. Yeah, it definitely did. I think it's almost difficult for me to separate those into personal and professional because I think they each inform the other. So, personally, when you're in that environment, you feel like you have to really rely on your own capabilities. You don't have your parents or just even the culture that you've always been used to kind of propping up every little interaction. I mean, there was always challenges in going to Spain, especially in the early days where you're really being put to the test And you really start to see that if I don't rise up and do this, whatever it is, it's not going to get done. I have to do this. And I think that can really be galvanizing and energizing. For me, it certainly was, where I started to gain more self-confidence and just awareness of my own capabilities, which I
Yeah.
think they need. It's like a bird needs room to fly or spread its wings, right? So similarly, I think people need to be really put out there on their own to discover their independence and really discover their capabilities of what they can do on their own.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, they have,
Professionally, then it was such a powerful personal experience that I just came back thinking, okay, well, I can't now go and sell washing machines. Like, I need to be part of this line of work that I believe in so much on a
yeah.
personal level. And I think that's how you can really find professional joy, if you're able to marry those together and say, I'm going to find the thing that I'm passionate about, that I really believe in, and find the niche in the economy where you're getting paid to do some aspect of it, frankly. And I think there's a lot of opportunity if you order your thoughts in that way, rather than say, well, I want to do X degree because I heard that you get paid a lot of money to do that, or because my parents want me to.
Yeah.
Those things may be true, but if it's not right for you, then it's not right, because that's the zoom level that you have to consider that question on, is in terms of yourself. And so I
Yeah.
think if you actually start with what is personally powerful to you,
Yes.
secondly, you look at where you can find those opportunities in the professional space. And that's
Mhm.
a good way to sequence those thoughts, I think.
I agree. Yes. So there are a lot of things that you learn as an international student, starting from, being self-resilient and self-sufficient, and all the way up to picking up skills that you didn't know that you needed in the real world. If you
Yes.
could pick out the top three or the top five valuable lessons that you learned during your time as an international student, what would they be?
Three or five is difficult. I mean, certainly there's one overriding one that comes to mind, because I think in addition to discovering your confidence, discovering your independence, you might be wondering, well, how do I do that? Is it
Mm.
just enough to get on the plane and go? Will they just, I'll wake up the next day after getting there and maybe I'm a little jet lagged and, oh my gosh, I actually feel really confident today. That's not quite how it works. I think you have to be open. And what I mean is, you have to let down your guard of things that maybe you wouldn't do at home.
Mhm.
You have to use this as an opportunity to expand and even to redefine who you are, because that's the kind of experience that study abroad is. It's
Yeah.
about growing and even changing who you are. And in order to do that, I think you have to say yes to things. You have to be open. So you could find yourself getting an invitation to, like, for example, I got an invitation to a birthday party that was an hour and a half down the Mediterranean coast out of Barcelona, just in some small town, with people that I barely knew. And I went because you have to view it as like an adventure, and like, oh man, like, what could I get into? I think you could also come to that experience and say, oh, like, who are these people? Why would I go to a birthday party for someone I don't even know? I just got to Barcelona and I'm still learning my way around. Why should I leave and go to some other small town that's too confusing?
Mhm.
You're kind of given a choice in that moment. Do you want to lean in a little bit to your experience and really get the most out of it? And it comes down to having an open mindset to accept and try things and have kind of a sense of adventure. And if you do that first, then you get to access all of the growth, all of the discovery, the resilience, the independence, the confidence. Those are the byproducts of your willingness to just say yes from time to time, when maybe a year ago or back home or in a different environment, you might have said no.
True. Yes. Being open to experiences and choices is crucial,
Mm-hmm.
but it also brings in the question of safety and the unpredictability that comes with it. So, are there any tips or advice that you would suggest to potential or aspiring international students to keep in mind when they're in a new country, to make sure that they don't get into any kind of trouble?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's always common sense things that I think people would do in any country. And I've traveled to several countries in my time, and I think there's an overriding theme of just being very aware, knowing your surroundings, knowing whom you're with at that time. Don't be walking alone in an unfamiliar place without anyone knowing where you are. Just kind of be keeping track of, well, who am I with right now? And who else knows where I am if they're not here? And what's the next thing that people are expecting from me? Or is someone expecting me to call them when I get home? Just kind of putting things in place for common sense so that if something does happen, people will be aware of it. I think that's key. Certainly learning about the environment that you specifically will be in. So we were
Mm-hmm.
talking a minute ago about big city versus small town. Well, these can have very different safety concerns. Small towns are often extremely safe, almost sleepy, right? Big
Mm-hmm.
cities can have elements where there could be less safe situations, but it's not to say that it's dangerous everywhere. A lot of times it's just a factor of living in bigger cities, which is the world around. It's the same. So just understanding the different areas and the places where you'll be, talking to locals who can give you good advice, so that you're not thinking that all neighborhoods are the same or all streets are the same. Um, and just heeding the advice that's given to you from locals. And finally, I would say when you get to universities and colleges in the US, you're given advisors. There are international student advisors, which was my first job many years ago. There's also academic advisors in your academic unit or your discipline that can help you more on registering for classes. How do I get an internship? These things. But you can always ask them and use them as a resource of what tips should I do? Or if you have questions about, is this particular place safe? Or I'm taking this trip, do you think that that sounds okay? Hey, I booked this Airbnb or this hotel. Is this in a good area? Americans in general, without speaking too broadly, are pretty open or pretty relaxed. The formality level is lower than what you might be used to. So it's really okay to just ask the question. Don't feel like you have to wander around wondering and you're not in a position where you're able to ask. If you just say, hey, I've got a question. I'm not sure if you know, but what do you think about this area that I'm planning to go on vacation to or on
Yeah.
holiday? Is this a good place to stay? What do you think? You can get really great feedback that way. And again, it goes back to just be open, take the initiative, ask the question. I think you'll be happy that you did.
Definitely. Okay. So you mentioned that you've traveled to several countries, France, Italy, Amadora. So how did these travels, influence your perspective on education and global connections?
Oh, that's a great question. Even in Europe, I think, which is a great laboratory for this question, there are so many differences in a short distance
Mhm.
that as you go from place to place, you notice similarities between people, but you also see really different attitudes around even something as simple as timeliness, punctuality. If you're in Germany and you're 10 seconds late for your train, it's gone. They don't care, which is
Yeah.
really shocking. In the US, it's also a very time based culture, but there's typically more of a cushion where you can be between 5 to 10 minutes late to almost anything, and people don't mind too much. I've
Mhm.
also been to India and some other places where the concept of time is much more fluid than I think what we're used to. So in each place, there's definitely a learning curve when you go where you're just trying to, it's like you're playing a new board game for the first time or a card game, and you don't really know the rules, and people are doing things that you're like, why are they doing that?
Yeah.
I was in France getting dinner once, and the people in Paris like would only speak to you in French, even after I was making it very clear that I don't speak French. I never made it to learning French. I was hoping that they would speak some English, and they were very perturbed by the fact that I wasn't ordering in French. And even when the server came back and like yelled at me something in French and I didn't know what he said, I felt like everything stopped in the restaurant and everyone was just like, where everything stops and they're all looking at you. It turns out he wanted me to take my napkin and put it on my lap so that he could set the plate down. But he was like, to get the napkin. I had no idea what he wanted me to do. It's kind of a silly, small example, but I think that's indicative as you go from place to place and travel. There are so many expectations or rules that everyone else is playing by that you just don't know. And you have to have the mindset to either be like, this is fun, or, as I told the story to some people, they said that sounds like my worst nightmare, the worst day ever. And I think it could be if you didn't kind of see it as funny and just do your best to learn each place that you go.
That's amazing. Having fun with an unknown language and just going with the flow is definitely an attitude that you do need to adopt as an international student in a completely new country. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to, get through situations.
Yeah, I think there's so much that's mindset versus the externality. Like when you realize that you are actually deciding if you're having a good time or not. That
Mm-hmm.
might sound a little simplistic, but I think people have more control over that than they realize. And study abroad can really help clue you in on that reality. Certainly it did for me.
Yeah.